Two of the greatest JRPG remakes of all time have graced us in 2024 with plenty more to come real soon. And it got me thinking, what other classic JRPGs deserve remakes? So in this video, I'll be sharing 10 classic JRPGs that I believe need and deserve remakes. And they won't be in any particular order, but I will save the one that I want remade the most for last. What JRPGs do you want remade? Let me know in the comments below. And speaking of classic RPGs, one upcoming game pays homage to classic strategy RPGs of the 16 and 32-bit era and is a sponsor of today's video, Unicorn Overlord. The incredible team at Vanillaware responsible for modern classics like 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim, and Dragon's Crown are back with their own unique spin on the classic strategy RPG. Combat features deep mechanics where balancing your unit properly will be key to victory. Each class has their own strengths and weaknesses, and planning accordingly will be critical. There's also a huge roster of classes and races, giving you the freedom to build your army how you want. And depending on how you set up your units, they may be able to build rapport, strengthening their combat ability. On top of exceptional strategic combat, one of the key features in Unicorn Overlord is exploration. You'll traverse a massive world where you can gather new allies, forge bonds, gather materials, rebuild towns, and much more. And we can't forget that signature Vanillaware art style. It looks better than ever with a gorgeous world, incredible character designs, and mesmerizing animations. Not to mention, they might be the best in the biz at making delicious looking food. My mouth is watering already. To try Unicorn Overlord for yourself, there's a demo available now where progress carries over to the full release. Unicorn Overlord will launch on March 8th, 2024 for Xbox Series X and S, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 5, and digital only on PlayStation 4. To pre-order your copy today, be sure to check out the link in the description or the pinned comment below. To begin, I want to start with my favorite game, Persona 4. Now, I know it's been remastered and re-released with Persona 4 Golden, but I'm talking about a full-on remake a la Persona 3 Reload. Now, what I loved about Persona 3 Reload is that it remained faithful to the story and the characters and improved the gameplay in so many ways. It made Tartarus more interesting, gave you more ways to level up, and in a lot of ways it made it more easy. But the thing that helped it so much was a graphical facelift, and I think that's what Persona 4 needs more than anything else. I know a lot of people think, it still holds up, it's totally fine, but if you go back and look at Persona 4 and then you compare it to Persona 3 Reload, man, it just does not hold up. Now, a couple things gameplay wise that I think they could add is easily the shift or the baton pass gameplay where you can shift between characters whenever you weaken an enemy. I think that would be perfect in Persona 4. It would make the combat much more dynamic. Now, you could do more handcrafted dungeons like Persona 5, but if all they do is upgrade it to make it look better like they did with Persona 3 Reload, I think that's totally fine, especially because each of the dungeons is themed unlike Tartarus, so in that sense I think it'll be totally fine. And in a lot of ways, I think what they did with Golden in terms of, updating combat, updating dungeons, making it just more smooth overall, I think that's totally fine. So I don't know if they would have to update a ton, but nonetheless, I would love to see Persona 4 with a Persona 3 Reload-esque visual facelift because I think it'd look awesome. Now, a lot of people argue that Chrono Trigger doesn't need a remake and that it's perfect as it is and that it still holds up. And while I agree with a lot of those sentiments, I think there's a large chunk of people that just don't want to go back and play those old versions, those old games. And honestly, there's not a great modern port of the game. You can play it on mobile and PC, but that's not ideal. And in fact, Yoshinori Kitase, the original director, brought up recently that if they were to do a remake, they would do it in one of three ways: either a direct port, a graphical remaster, or a grand scale remake on the scale of something like Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, what I find funny about them saying a port is that they seemingly admit that the current ports aren't good enough, like the ones on mobile and PC, and I totally agree. This game deserves a loving, high-quality port, if nothing else. But personally, if I had my preference, I would do a graphical remaster a la Star Ocean: The Second Story R, kind of that HD 2D style. Chrono Trigger is a pixel art game, and I think it needs to stay in that style. Now, it could work in something like what they did with Trials of Mana. They could go from pixel to 3D, but I think the spirit of Chrono Trigger is in that pixel art and it should remain there. Now, you could add things like voice acting, and in fact, I think that would be essential because it really gives more life to these characters in ways that we couldn't have gotten them in the original game. And I know some people say, it ruins the game, keep it like it is. And if you want to keep it like it is, what's the point of the remake? You can go play that original game, but I think adding some high quality voice acting would totally breathe new life into this game. And in terms of the combat, I think you could probably keep that relatively the same. I think that's what holds up the best about Chrono Trigger. Those no loading screens, you just get right into the battle. Maybe some ways to speed up combat, but other than that, I think it's pretty great as it is. Man, just talking about this game, I'm excited and now I want to play it. I was trying to think of a Tales game that could really benefit from a remake, and the one that stood out to me the most was Tales of the Abyss. It's easily one of the most beloved entries in the series, and outside of the PS2 and the 3DS, there's really no way to play it on modern hardware. Now, art style-wise, I think it still looks pretty great, so if you were to remake it, I think you keep it in the same spirit of that old art style. You know, it's very exaggerated, very anime. Those facial expressions are classic, those definitely need to stay, but you know, the animations are pretty stiff, so you would definitely need to update those, make it more expressive. And in terms of like the quality of the character models, they definitely look old, so to update those with some modern high quality character models would look amazing. Now, I think parts of the game that need a remake the most are the level design and the dungeons. To me, it's just boring. You know, it's got that on-rails camera where you can't control it, and it's a lot of those cookie cutter dungeons that have plagued the Tales series for so long. So I think making some really cool dungeons, putting the camera behind, you know, third person traditional over the shoulder camera, I think that would be awesome. And while the combat is good, let's tighten it up a bit. Let's bring it up to modern standards like Tales of Arise, make it much more fluid, less stiff, and I think that could be awesome. The Tales series is kind of hot these days, you know, especially coming off of Tales of Arise, so giving one of the most beloved entries a full-on remake, I think that could be really cool. Now, I know one franchise that a lot of fans want Level 5 to return to is Dark Cloud. However, with Level 5's penchant for wanting everything to be cross-media, and Dark Cloud not exactly having the deepest story, in fact, I don't even think the main character really talks, I think that's doubtful. However, I just love the concept of the original Dark Cloud, and I think a remake could serve it really well. I mean, you go dungeon crawling, find parts, take those parts to rebuild a town, and then you get to explore the town and talk to the people in it. It's just such a cool idea that no game's really done before. Now, all that said, have you played Dark Cloud recently? It just doesn't hold up that well at all. It's very stiff, the combat is boring, it's really, really bad. Like, hitting stuff just doesn't feel good at all. It's super clunky. So I think making the combat more fluid and more fun would be a absolute must. And I think it would be smart to expand each zone. Like, let's add more parts to find, let's add more characters, add more building. Let's just make each of these towns bigger and have more things to do there. Plus, I think it'd be really cool to add some kind of online component where you could build your own towns for other players to build back up, and then, you know, you could play theirs. It's an endless content loop, and I know developers and publishers love that. Again, I know it's wishful thinking, but hey, what are we making this video for if not to get crazy? Now, you want to talk about a game that needs a remake badly, let's talk about The Legend of Dragoon. Now, I remember this game blowing my mind when it first came out. Visually, it looked absolutely stunning, put a lot of JRPGs at the time, or just any game really at the time, to total shame. But if you go back and play it now, woof, does it look rough. The PS5 version really exposed just how badly this game looks, and it totally needs a full ground up visual facelift. I mean, the concepts are there. If remade correctly, this game could look downright stunning. I mean, the towns in this game conceptually are so cool and look amazing back in the day, and I think with a remake they could look even better. Now, I do think the combat needs to go full action. At the time, it was doing this interesting kind of timed button press thing that was novel at the time, but now it's just annoying. There's a lot of games that do this, and I just feel like that idea of turn-based combat where you have to time the button presses in that specific way just doesn't hold up, and it gets annoying. And I think what helps too is there's a wide variety of weapons for all the different characters you recruit, so action could be really, really fun. I think also one thing that would need to be expanded is the music. While the music is good in this game, they reuse songs a lot. Like, a lot of the towns just use the same theme song over and over. So I think expanding it, giving each town its own unique theme would help a lot. And let's get some good voice acting. You know, it was the PS1 days. We didn't know what voice acting was for games. So let's get in there. Let's get some good voice acting that's not embarrassing. Now, I know fans would just take a straight remaster of Skies of Arcadia at this point, but I would love a remake, mainly because, well, I never played the game. I know, but that's why a remake would be perfect, because for people like me that never played it, you could have it in all its glory in a remake. Now, let's give this game a nice facelift. Now, visually, I think it still kind of holds up. You know, artistically, it's really unique. It stands out a lot. However, the character models are obviously very old looking, very rigid, but still pretty expressive. So if we could give a nice facelift, I think that would be great. Being able to see the world and all these characters in modern visual would be so cool, especially with the airship stuff. Being able to fly around to these different islands, man, that would look awesome with modern visuals. And also, let's definitely update the combat. While it wasn't bad back then, you know, maybe adding in action combat I think would be better. It would make the game feel more dynamic, especially those airship battles. Let's definitely make those full-on action, you know, being able to fly around, do those air-to-air ship battles. It might be kind of cool if you're like jumping between airships. That would be awesome. awesome. And I know they expanded things in the Legends version, but let's expand it even more. Let's add more islands. Let's add new ways you can upgrade your ship. Let's add new ways you can upgrade your home base. And let's get the home base earlier in the game so you can have it be a part of the game for longer. But I think one thing that's super important is to keep that lighthearted classic adventure tone. That's what made the game so special, so they can't lose that part of it. Overall, Skies of Arcadia is such a classic game that I know a lot of people love, and a lot of people would love to see get remade. Now, to be honest, I'm really surprised that the original Parasite Eve hasn't been remade already. Based on how much remakes are all the rage these days and how popular Resident Evil is, to me it just makes too much sense. And I say Resident Evil, and I know that the original Parasite Eve isn't a survival horror game, but the second game pretty much went full-on Resident Evil, and I think remaking Parasite Eve as a third-person shooter RPG hybrid would be excellent. Now, personally, I love survival horror games, and I know RPG fans don't, though. They don't really tend to mix super well. However, I do think personally remaking Parasite Eve in the vein of like the more recent Resident Evil remakes would be awesome. I mean, can you imagine that game with its dark tone, going through New York, fighting monsters with a badass female heroine? Aya Brea, man, sign me up. Now, here's a game where I feel like they could take some liberties and totally expand the game, because the original Parasite Eve is relatively short. It's only like 10 hours. So, you know, like add in some side missions, help some people around the city fighting monsters, do some exploration stuff, like really soak in the atmosphere. Let's get some new weapons. I mean, let's just go nuts. Let's do this thing right like it deserves. To me, I just feel like it's a huge missed opportunity to not do this game. And they've even teased it, like in the Final Fantasy VII Remake reveal trailer, they have Aya Brea kind of like off to the side over there. So I feel like they've almost been teasing fans for years. So I think it's time. Let's make it happen. Now, unless you're a deep cut Fire Emblem fan like me, you're probably thinking, what the heck is Genealogy of the Holy War? Well, it was a Japan only entry on the Super Famicom, and I think for those two reasons alone, it would justify a remake. But let me share a few more interesting tidbits on this game. So first of all, it was the game that introduced the series weapon triangle, where swords beat axes, axes beat lances, and lances beat swords, sort of this game's version of rock, paper, scissors. And it also introduced a romance system where, depending on what happens in the first half of the game, could affect characters in the second half, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. And also, in a lot of ways, it's very similar to Fire Emblem Three Houses, arguably the most popular entry in the entire series. So having a game that kind of mimics that could be really good for sales. So in this game, you're in this officer's academy for a lot of it. It sort of serves as your home base, and you go there between missions to talk to characters and upgrade characters. So I think in a remake, you could totally put more emphasis on the school life aspect on this, really flesh it out and make it so you could walk around the school and stuff like that. I think that would be really cool. And also, like Three Houses, there are two halves of this game with a huge time gap. So that makes for some really compelling storytelling that I don't want to spoil here, but to say the least, man, you're in for a treat if this game ever does get remade. And in fact, there's been rumors of a remake for years, going back to even the 3DS, I believe. So hopefully they come true, and in the next couple years, we do get that fabled remake. Now, you want to talk about wishful thinking? It's wishful thinking to ever expect that we'll get a remake for Xenogears for just so many reasons, but this game truly needs and deserves one. Not only is it an all-time classic, not only did it never get a port to any modern console, or really a port ever, but it's not even finished. For anyone that's actually played the game, they know that the second disc infamously turns into a visual novel for a majority of it. I mean, you're just sitting there reading dialogue, and the characters are kind of just sitting there absorbing it. There are some battles, but for the most part, it's a visual novel. Now, the team did their best to hide it, but in hindsight, we know what happened. Obviously, the game never got finished for budgetary reasons, and they just had to quickly finish what they could. But what's amazing about it is the game's still incredible despite those shortcomings. So it would be amazing to let the team finish what they started properly and fully realize the vision of this game. Now, how would it be remade? Would it be an HD 2D art style? Would it be a grand scale one like Final Fantasy VII? Personally, I think HD 2D would be perfect, not only for, you know, the actual chances of getting this game made, but also the original game was pretty much an HD 2D game anyway. It was like one of the first of its kind. So let's just keep in that spirit. But also, let's add some voice acting to really add some flavor to these characters. Let's redo the animated cutscenes to bring it up to modern standards. And the combat, I think, is really unique. So I say let's just keep the combat the same, where you kind of are making up your own combos. I think that's really fun. So I say don't touch that. I know it's a long shot, but hey, that would be absolutely amazing to see Xenogears remade in the way it deserves. Now, to end this list, I want to talk about the game I personally want remade the most, and that is Final Fantasy Tactics. Again, it's borderline criminal that this game hasn't been ported to modern consoles outside of iOS devices and maybe Android, but that doesn't count. We want this on consoles and PC. Now, I would almost take up a straight up port of War of the Lions, but seeing what Square did with Triangle Strategy, I would love to see a modern facelift for Tactics. You know, imagine this game with HD 2D visuals. Oh my God, that would just look unreal. Now, gameplay wise, I don't think you need to change like almost anything at all. This game is pretty much perfect. Like, don't mess it up like you did with the Tactics Ogre remaster, level capping so you can't grind and stuff like that. Don't do that. Leave it as it is. To me, this is the best strategy RPG of all time, and nothing needs to be tuned. If you wanted, you could add some difficulty settings for those people that are new to strategy RPGs, because there are some fights like Wheatgraph and Riot Bane's Castle that are challenging, but other than adding in some difficulty options like that, don't change anything. However, one thing I think needs to be adjusted that they changed for War of the Lions was the localization. It borders on Old English with the "I doth protest" way that they talk about things, and I get why they did that. It adds more flavor to the world, but honestly, it just makes reading the dialogue much more annoying. And you can call me a crybaby for suggesting that, but show me any other modern game with dialogue like that, and yeah, you'll see that games these days are just trying to make games as playable as possible, and if you have the dialogue like that, I just think it's gonna annoy a lot of people. So let's just remove as many barriers of entry as possible so people can enjoy this game like it was meant to be enjoyed. Now, these are JRPGs that need remakes and don't have them, but to see what I think are the best JRPG remakes currently available, minus Persona 3 Reload and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, check out this video right here. And special thanks to Reset Switch, Tyler Kuzawa, and the Miyazaki Man for supporting me over on Patreon. To get exclusive videos and other cool perks, consider supporting me over on patreon.com/thegamingshelf. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.